what is blah blah? And I say, well, blah blah is just what forms the contrast with glue glue. So we understand that glue glue means not blah blah, and blah blah means not glue glue. Then it's clear you haven't been told anything informative, right? You don't actually know. If you don't know what blah blah means, me telling you that glue glue means not blah blah doesn't tell you what glue glue means.
Blooding. Oof.
I don't think it's fair to say that Darth wants to live by that standard. I don't think he wants to be like a charitable person.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah, and
Yeah, I
Matt
think he
Dillahunty
feels.
says
Strong agree.
he doesn't need God to be good. He can be good without God.
I don't
I
know why
think that
it's better to say that Matt Dillahunty has no standards. That
I
seems to
think
make him
that
a worse
wait,
person.
yeah,
I
Darth.
didn't say he doesn't have
Wait, did you
standards.
hear
I
what I
said he
said?
doesn't have any standard beyond himself. There's a
I
difference.
think that Darth
Yeah, that's not
envisions
true.
himself as a righteous arm of God type of thing.
Jack, are you aware of what I was criticizing John Lee for, which Darth also does? So
What's that?
Darth does this thing where he goes, Matt Dillahunty is a megalomaniac. He uses the word megalomaniac. You know why? He goes on to say, and they're supposed to go, why is he a megalomaniac, Darth? And the answer is like, oh, I'll tell you why. Okay, this is how psychotic Matt Dillahunty is, right? Matt Dillahunty says that even if God existed, he still wouldn't worship him. That is the definition of megalomania. Imagine if God was actually real and then not worshiping him. What kind of psychotic person would do that? So then I told John about forgiveness as it was prescribed in the Bible, right? You were prescribed to forgive. I asked John Lee if he would forgive Matt Dillahunty, and he said, no, I'm not. I'm not going to do that yet. Right? He refused to. And I said, how are you not just like Matt Dillahunty? And John Lee uses the same criticism. And he says, well, how do you figure? And I explained to him, I was like, well, the idea is that if one is to think that God is real, then it would be insane not to do what he's prescribing, right? In the face of that. You already think that God is real. And here you are, just like Matt Dillahunty, not doing what God is prescribing. How is that not the same thing? And if Matt Dillahunty is insane, how are you not insane?
You know, it's interesting because it's actually related to the same philosophical question that was coming up yesterday, right? Because it seems like Christians don't actually think that the good is the action guiding norm. So, or at least they're committed to that given the view of sin, right? And if you don't think the good is the action guiding norm, see, the question is, if you actually thought God existed, that would seem to commit you to thinking that God was good, right? But what would it mean to believe that God was good if you weren't motivated to be in accord with God?
Yeah, I think they have some kind of family resemblance concept of good or something like that. They just
Yeah, well, they
don't
don't
want to
think
say that.
they don't. Well, I mean, I'm not sure they're consistent, right? But the point is, if you think the good is the action guiding norm, then to think something is good is just going to entail that you have some desire to be in accord with it, right? But see, if you think that you can sin for its own sake, right? Then what does it mean to? It just seems like you're giving up on the idea of the good as the action guiding norm, and that's, and then it's just not clear what's even being said, like what that model of human action is. And as I say, it's not really. It's hard to understand how sin could have originated in the first place. It doesn't seem like Christians can explain that.
So basically, Jack is saying Christians are weak, and so therefore they don't believe that good is the action guiding norm. because Christians are weak?
What did I say? Why is he saying this?
I don't know. I don't know.
So
I don't know.
Yeah, I
all
don't
right,
get
I
it
can
either.
explain it. It's real simple. So when Christians sin, that is a form of weakness. Doesn't speak to their philosophy or their
Can we just
beliefs
stop him
on
now?
the good. So I don't know why you made that conclusion that if they were to fail, be weak, or sin, then they don't believe that the good is the action guiding norm, whatever that means.
I mean,
Means that you ought
concrete
to
will
do what's
just say
good.
anything.
Means it's what you ought to do. Good is what you ought to
Yeah, I
do.
figured. So even I can be weak, aspire to do the good, and fail to do the good because of whatever weaknesses um, that I might have. So there you go.
Well, are the Christians actually trying to do the good, concrete?
I mean, I think the point about Matt Dillahunty is, right, is that if he thought the good was the action guiding norm, right, it wouldn't be coherent to say that if I thought God existed, I would.
Right. Yeah, that's a good way of putting it. It wouldn't.
Right.
It wouldn't be coherent to say like, oh, well, if it is the case that God is real, then what I ought do, I'm not going to do. Right? It doesn't make any fucking sense. Like
Yeah,
it's like he
he'd
by
have to.
definition ought to do it. Right?
Exactly. So the thing is, in order to say something like that, you have to understand what you're saying is, I don't think God is good. So if God existed, his existing wouldn't commit me to thinking that he was good, right? But that's just to equivocate on. I mean, if you thought that
Right.
what
Right.
it meant for something to be God essentially was something that was good,
So in
he
Matt
would just be
Dillahunty's
talking
case, it's
about.
like
He would.
in Matt Dillahunty's
Go
case, it's
ahead.
something
Sorry.
like, if it is the case, okay, he finds out God is real. Well, then God is by definition not only worthy of worship, but Matt Dillahunty ought worship him. So that's the criticism is like, why? And when Matt Dillahunty says, if he says like, oh, I'm not going to worship him, that's just like silly, right? It's just like it's by definition true. Not only
Yeah,
is
he
God
has
worthy
to
of worship,
say.
but he should.
He has to say something. He would have to say something like this. I mean, it's kind of silly to like steelman an idiot like Matt Dillahunty, but he would have to say something like this. He'd have to say, well, Christians and atheists are both talking about the same possible person, right? And it's just that Christians are mistaken in thinking that that person has this property of perfect
Yeah, he's doing an
goodness.
external critique, right? He's doing an external critique, basically.
Yeah, yeah. If he says they're not actually good, it's not really clear. Well, I mean, it's tricky. Like,
But the criticism of the Matt position is an internal critique.
yeah, I mean, the Christians will say, well, if you thought God was not good, then you're just not talking about the same person. Or, I mean, they might say that, right?
Yeah, I just think I understand what Matt's trying to say. It's just this.
No, I do understand what he's trying to say. What he's trying to say is that he doesn't actually think God is good.
Right, exactly.
You know,
Yeah.
and he's judging him by a different standard. You know, not a standard internal to God, but by some other standard of the good, right? And so he's just saying, look, if that person existed, he wouldn't be a good person.
Yeah, so I think you bring up a good point about like when you use the same kind of logic with the Christian, right? If God is, so you find it, we can skip the part where you find out God is real because from their profession, they already think God is real, right? And then the prescription from the Almighty God of the universe, they're like, no, no thanks, right? What the fuck is that? It's actually kind of worse because they're already actually thinking that it is true.
Yeah, I mean, I thought of some. I can think of some other examples that relate to this that I didn't bring up yesterday,
Really?
like the stuff about suppressing the truth.
Really?
Oh, sorry. I mean,
Cover up or something.
how
There you go.
is it? How
Yeah,
bad
it's
is it
better.
now?
I can't hear the windows.
Okay, yeah. I could think of some examples that I didn't bring up yesterday, right? So, like when they talk about suppressing the truth and unrighteousness, it's as though they're saying that you turn away from God because you think you know that He's good, and you don't desire to be in accord with the good, right?
Yeah, it
But see,
sounds weird,
what I'm
right?
saying is, there's something crazy. Well, at least on my model of human action, there's something crazy about the idea of thinking something is good. Thinking of something is good and not being motivated to be in accord with it. I mean, Catholics are not going to say, well, Thomists are not going to say that. They're going to want to say that that when you turn away from God, nonetheless, you still desire Him, right? So they have to have this concept of like some kind of unconscious desire, I think, right?
Yeah, they
Like
want to say that they want to do it, but are like, oh, it's some kind of like, missing the mark bullshit or something like that, right?
Yeah, they're disordered. Well, presumably they're disordered in some way and can't really see what the true goods are. But the point is that the way that Darth thinks about atheists is that they hate God because He's good, right? And they
This is what they
love
do.
evil, right? And I'm just saying that I can't really make sense of what that could even mean.
Well, they want to
This is what they
sin.
do.
They want to
This is what they
sin,
do.
and they also don't want to be bowed down to someone, even if they're good.
Yeah, but my point is, look, what is it? I'm saying the way that I understand how a person acts is that he thinks about what the most desirable thing to do is in some given circumstance, right? And when he concludes that deliberation, he then undertakes that action, right?
Well, think about something in regards to like a specific example, Jack. So let's just say something like premarital sex, right? Whereas in the view, it is a moral wrong in order to have premarital sex under like a Christian worldview. And so it would be saying, it's kind of like what Haiti was saying, right? It's the enjoyment of sin kind of overtakes the desire to do good if it benefits you in some way, right? So if you
Yeah,
have
but
like a
yeah,
short-term gain for a long-term problem, I guess would kind of be the example. It's like self-gratification in the immediate sense overtakes people, and it's why they do what's wrong to begin with, right?
yeah, but the problem is, atheists wouldn't think premarital sex is wrong,
No,
so they're like,
yeah,
why do I
yeah,
have
that's
to
what I'm
stop
saying. So
doing it? And then they think, well, if God thinks it's wrong, He's wrong, something like that. They're not acknowledging it's wrong, and they want to just keep doing it so they won't believe in God. I think that's what Darth thinks.
Yeah, but the thing is, right, what would it mean for a Christian to think that it was wrong and yet be motivated to do it?
Oh, a Christian doing premarital sex.
Yeah, because I don't understand what it
Oh,
means. I don't understand what it means to say, I ought not do this,
I
right?
see.
It seems to me they must think, right, in order to explain their action, that it is actually good, right? There might be
Mm.
reasons that count against it, right? But they think the reasons that count in favor it outweigh
oh my
the
God, is someone
reasons that
dying in
count
here?
against it,
Mm.
right? Because otherwise, it just seems like the good is not actually related to guiding action, right?
Well, I talked to a Christian
In other
last week.
words, what I'm saying is that these terms, good, desirability, and ought, are of a piece, right? What's good is what ought to be done. What's good is what's desirable. What's desirable is what ought to be done, and so on, right? They're all basically the same concept, right? So that's why I find I don't understand the Christian doctrine of sin, because they're saying that what motivates you is, well, at least some of the time, they seem to be saying that people sin for its own sake. They sin because it's wrong, right?
Yeah, that's not my position. It's more so, like I said, kind of like short-term gain with a long-term problem.
Yeah, but a short-term gain, right, is making a mistake in thinking that something like um, you you're mistaken about thinking that you won't regret behaving this way, right?
Yeah, so like the best example of this was probably it's probably going to be like Paul, right? If we're just kind of looking at Christian doctrine,
You got a lot
Paul
of
has
wind
this.
noise, Jack.
Sorry.
Yeah, Paul has this statement he makes where he talks about this like internal war between the flesh and the spirit within him, right? And he explains it as in his spirit desires to do what is right and kind of bring him closer to God, whereas in his flesh, his like instantaneous gratification causes him to do things he does not want to do. And so he provides like sentences such as, the good that I want to do, this is what I don't do. But the evil I do not want to do, this is what I find myself doing. And so that, I think that gives a really good picture of kind of like a Christian's view of relationship with sin. I know there are some Christians out there that say, oh, you just want to do evil because it's evil. And I just think they're stupid, quite
Well, okay,
honestly.
but then it just sounds like there you're talking about what I would call a coercive cause, right?
Wait, Triple B, are you a
You're
Christian?
gonna, yeah,
So
I'm a Christian.
what I'm saying is that I would draw a distinction between actions which are rationalized by beliefs and desires, which is to say they're undertaken for reasons, right? They have an oughtness to them. They're commitments, basically, or they're undertaken in virtue of commitment, something like that. And that there
So
can be
what do you mean by a
forces.
coercive cause? Just
Yeah,
explain
by
that for me.
coercive cause,
Yeah.
I mean some force that interferes with the exercise of your rationality and agency, which I take to be basically mutually constitutive.
So how do you see what I was saying had to do with a coercive cause?
Plus, it sounds like you're saying that there's a disposition of the body that interferes with the exercise of one's agency, in
No, no,
Paul's
no, no.
case.
No, no, no. So I think you're misunderstanding. It's not that there's like a separate entity. Um, it's so think of it like this, like your conscience to an extent, right? That's kind of how Paul describes it. Is
Yeah,
like
but the
there's
way I
there's a
understand the conscience is like this, right? I
well,
understand.
yeah, I know. Just let me explain really quick. Like the idea of, have you ever done something in order to just kind of like do something for yourself that you know you shouldn't have done, right? So there's that little small voice or the angel and devil on the shoulder that says, "Hey, probably shouldn't do this." And then there's that other voice that's like, "Hey, maybe you should do this and here's why." And you kind of weigh it on the scales of what you get out of it versus the consequences you have to pay for what you do. And so that's more of what it is. It's
Yeah,
not
but
applying
I'm
like,
trying to understand if you're talking about
yeah.
a failure of rationality or not, right? So here are what seem to me to be the options, right? On the one hand, you could say that those people are guilty of a failure of moral perception, right? That's why I asked you if what you meant was that they don't see within the moment that they're going to regret this, right?
All right, you
That,
use big words for me sometimes, Jack. Break down exactly what you're trying to say.
okay, so look, on my view, right, I understand the way human action works is that people deliberate, right? They think about the different options available to them, and they they try to figure out in that reflection which one is the most desirable option, which is to say the best option, right? Which is to say what they ought to do, all things considered,
Well, it
right?
depends on like the circumstances as well. What would be the best option, right? So there
Yeah,
would
that's
be external
fine.
circumstances that kind
And
of
that's all things
define that best
considered.
option.
Yeah, that's all things considered.
That's why I'm talking about all things considered ought, right? Now, surely it's the case that people don't always do what they ought to do, all things considered, right? We can grant
Yeah.
that at the outset. So the question is why, right? Now, it seems to me one option is to say that they are misperceiving, right? They don't actually see that something which looks like the best option is actually the worst option, right? So there's a failure of moral perception. Their moral perceptive faculties are not reliable in that instance, right? That's one
So give an
possibility.
example. Give an example of that, like an analogy.
You could look at two pieces of cake, and one looks more alluring than the other, and you think that looks like the more delicious one.
Well, I
Right?
mean, would that have to do with any moral perception though?
Well,
Because
it could be the same.
like
It
that's
could
just
be
an
the
amoral
same,
thing, right?
huh?
Choosing
But
between
I don't see how
choosing
there's
between a
any
flavor of
difference. I don't see how there's any difference in the moral case. You have two courses of action available to you. One seems like the morally better course of action, but in fact, after you undertake it, you think, no, that was the worst course of action. I apprehended the moral facts when I made the decision. I didn't really see that this was the better
Win, Jack.
action.
Win.
Sorry, I didn't really see that this was the better action rather than the worse action. Is that okay? So that's one possibility, a failure of moral perception, right? Another type of failure is a failure of reasoning, right? We might in the course of our deliberation engage in inferences. We might try to reason, if I do this, would this happen? Would this likely happen? And would therefore this be the better outcome? And that kind of thing, right? And sometimes when we reason, we make mistakes. We make faulty inferences. So again, there's a failure in the functioning of our cognitive faculties, right? I think another thing that happens when we don't do what we ought to do is that we're coerced, which is to say that facts external to ourselves or even internal to ourselves, right, facts about our body or unconscious dispositions, right, interfere with the exercise of our agency, of our rationality, of practical reason, right? So those are three different ways. Yeah.
So take me back in regards to what we were discussing about Paul in Romans. You were saying it was coercive rationality or something to that effect.
Am I still connected?
Yeah, you are.
Sorry.
Now.
Yeah. I was saying that. I first suggested, well, there was a failure of perception, or perhaps reasoning. Right? He because the way you had framed it originally was to say he's mistaking short-term goods for long-term goods, or something like that, right? Short-term benefits, right? And so I thought, well, okay, so he misunderstands, right? He misunderstands in the moment of his decision that what appears to be, right, the more alluring option is actually the option he will regret taking. And if he understood that he would regret it, he would have done otherwise, right? So there's a failure of perception or reasoning, right? But then it sounded like you were saying, no, there's this force, right, of the flesh which interferes with the exercise of his reason, right? Which sounds to me
Well,
like a
it's just saying
coercive
that
cause.
it just says that the flesh. So what we mean by the flesh is literally like flesh, blood, bone. It's not some separate entity. What we mean by the flesh is specifically what it says. It's like you have flesh on your body. There are things that you do to gratify your body. So like we use the examples like drugs or premarital sex or stealing something or murder, like because you're getting something, some sort of revenge or like that would be gratifying the flesh in that way. It's like anything that you gain for a short-term gain that you know is morally abhorrent or morally wrong. And so within what I'm referencing the flesh when Paul is talking is it's literal. He's saying there are things I do to gratify my body, there are things I do to gratify my life that I don't really want to do, even though they're like beneficial to me, right? They can even be beneficial, right? So such as the topic being sin, like I think the thing I started out with was like premarital sex. Like that's extremely beneficial, right? That's a lot of fun. It's feels good. It's all of these different things, but ultimately in that you see that. And I'm not saying Paul had premarital sex. Please understand. I don't want anyone to mistake what I'm saying here. But it's the idea of there's not really any downside to that other than you have like maybe a hypocrisy because you've spoken about it or spoken against it, or maybe you just have this idea that is condemnation for doing the action when you've been raised a certain way or something like that, right? And of course it falls under like God commands not to, you do it, so on and so forth.
Yeah, but this isn't really an answer to my question, right? So let's just
I didn't know you asked a question.
Well, I'm trying to understand. Do you think that Paul is making is misperceiving what is good? Do you think there's a failure in moral perception?
Do I think he's misperceiving what is good?
Yeah,
No,
in that instance when he makes that choice.
No, I think you can make.
So he fully understands. He fully understands what the best option is, right?
No. So I would say he knows what he's doing is evil. Regardless, it's choosing to do evil, even though you know.
Why are you saying
you're going
no?
to regret it.
That sounds like you're saying that he does fully understand what the best option is.
Okay, yeah, I would agree with that. So you're talking
okay, but you see now you understand the problem, right? Which is, if you think the good is the action guiding norm, right? What explains why a person does not act in accord with it, right? And I think you really only have two options there, right? Because here it sounds like
with a good acting norm.
Sorry?
On why someone does not choose a good acting norm.
Why someone chooses not to be in accord, does not act in accord with the good, with what they take to be the good, right? If you think the good is the action guiding norm, then you would say, right? Because here's the model. If you think the good is the action guiding norm, then the model is this. Well, given that there are no coercive causes, right? When they correctly judge something to be good, right, they will act in accord with it, as long as there's no coercive cause, right?
Sorry, I'm listening. Taking out trash.
Right? Because, see, you could be mistaken about what the good is, right? That would be a failure of moral perception or moral reasoning, right? So if you're mistaken about what the good is, then You just mistake something that's a false good for a true good, right? And you act in accord with that because you mistakenly think that's the true good when it's the false good, right? But you're
Yeah.
saying that's not what's going on in this case, right? You're saying he perceives correctly what the true good is, right? In his
Yeah.
deliberations, he comes to the correct conclusion that what he ought to do is X, but nonetheless he does Y, right? But then
Yeah.
that sounds to me like you're just saying that he's coerced by dispositions of the body which override the exercise of his free agency.
I don't think it overrides. So just the desire to do something and the ability to choose it, it doesn't override his free agency. It would just
Well,
say that.
then I don't understand what you think explains
Ooh,
his failure to be in accord with the good if you think the good is the action guiding norm. It just sounds like you're reverting to a position in which you think the good is not the action guiding norm, in which case I don't understand the model of action you're using.
None of them follow.
hey,
None of
can
that
you mute
follows.
just a second? Can you mute just a second? Okay. Say what there was like an ambulance and there was
Yeah,
like
I'll
a noise.
say the
Can you
whole
just
thing.
repeat your last statement?
I'll just say the whole thing again, right? So
Okay, that's fine.
look, if you think the good is the action guiding norm, right,
Mm-hmm.
then it sounds like when somebody correctly judges the good, what explains why they don't act in accord with it is a coercive cause,
And
right?
you're saying the coercive cause is just desire,
A
right?
disposition of the body, let's call it, an urge. I don't want to call it a desire because I think desires can be rational, right? So I'm talking about something irrational. Let's call it an urge, right? Some
Well, I
kind of
mean,
compulsion, something like
well,
that, right?
that urge isn't just like based in the body though. It's based in the mind as well. It's like working in tandem. It's like I think about the consequences of my actions, and yet I take them anyway in order to
Look, you could
gratify
call
my
it the
body.
mind if you want, right?
So I
The
think it's
key
together.
point is you can call it the mind if you want, right? I mean, I don't really fully understand that, but I could grant you that for the sake of argument. The point is that what you're talking about is something that's irrational, coercive, purely causal, right?
So
And
you
so
think
yeah, sorry, go
so
ahead.
so you think the ability to choose between A and B, like a disposition of free will, is just
I
irrational?
don't think free will is a disposition, right? I think it's a commitment and it's normative, right? And it's therefore rational, right? So what things can interfere with my free will, right? I could have compulsions that interfere with my free will, right?
Yeah, well, so take the example you gave of cake earlier, right? You said here's a vanilla cake, here's a chocolate cake. Which one do I want? Right? So you would say that if in the moment, based off the external circumstances, you're looking at chocolate, you're looking at vanilla, in the moment, you can like taste sort of. You're not actually literally tasting it, but you're thinking about which one you're going to eat and you're thinking about the taste and you're like, okay, in this moment I prefer chocolate, right? And so you choose chocolate. Would you say that that choice is a disposition or of irrational free will, even though there's like this cognitive faculty included in why you've chosen? It's not arbitrary, it's that you desire it in the moment.
I'm saying that if you've exercised your agency, right,
Yeah, so in eating the cake, right?
what you've done is you've deliberated and determined which is what by your lights is the better of the two options, and in virtue of understanding that one or concluding that one is the better of the two options, you
But you would still conclude
therefore
that as coercive, right?
no, it's not coercive.
So if your body is telling you you want chocolate cake, right? You want the immediate gratification of this chocolate cake. How is that any different than what I was explaining about Paul in regards to like the desire,
I'm
immediate
saying
gratification.
that what's coercive, right, is what interferes with your judgment. Sorry, what interferes with the exercise of your agency. So you might say, this is the best thing for me to do, and not do it, right? Something external coerces you into not doing it, even though you judge that you have most reason to do it, right?
Well,
So
I just think it's the same. It works the same way on both sides, ultimately. Like, by the way you're kind of explaining it, I think it works both
you're just
ways,
not
right? So
understanding what I'm saying
you're,
then. So I'll try to repeat the distinction and see if it comes across better the second time. No doubt that's my
do you want to change? Do you
failure.
want to change the analogy so we get away from something like the cake
You can pick
analogy is
anything
like
you
being
want.
like an
It's going to
A.
be the same.
No. I'm asking you. So the cake analogy is more of like an amoral thing. You want to do something that has a little more moral weight to it. That way, maybe I can
Yeah,
understand
do
what
you
you're
like
saying a little
cheating on
better.
your wife,
Yeah, so
Stephen?
you might think cheating on your wife, that there are reasons that count in favor of it. You might think there are reasons that count against it. And
Okay. So, but wouldn't both be coercive in some way based off the decision you make? So let's
look, I'll
say,
just explain to you again what I mean by coercive, because it doesn't seem like
okay,
you understand that, right?
okay, go
So
ahead.
I'm saying that what's coercive is what interferes with you doing with what you judge you ought to do, right? So what I'm saying is, if you're uncoerced, right, and you've concluded in in the course of your deliberations that some course of action is the one you have all things considered most reason to do. You have all things considered reason to do, right? What you have most reason to do, right? Then, given that you understand that it's what you have most reason to do, you will do it, right? Now, why might you not do it even though you've judged that? Well, because there are coercive causes that interfere with the exercise of your agency, your free agency. Is it clear now?
Oh, I hope you weren't talking to. Did no one tell him I was on the phone?
Sorry, I'll repeat it. It's fine.
Yeah.
That's no
Oh,
problem.
sorry.
No, that's
I
okay.
thought I was
That's
hoping someone
fine.
would tell you.
So look, what I'm saying is, if there's no coercive causes present, right, and you deliberate and you come to a conclusion about what you have all things considered reason to do, right, you conclude that all things considered, you should do A rather than B, right? What I'm saying is that if there are no coercive causes present, then in virtue of the fact that you recognize that A is your best option, it's what you have most reason to do, you will do A. So if in fact you don't do A, we're going to say it's because there were coercive causes present, right?
Okay, so
That's what I mean by coercion.
okay, so let me just steel man so I'm following exactly what you're saying. So if A is, I will not cheat on my wife because I think cheating on my wife is morally evil or morally wrong. So I choose to do A. I choose to not cheat on my wife, right? You're saying no no coercive cause is present. Do we agree?
I'm saying that to choose to do A only happens when you think A is the best option, right?
Okay, so I'm saying I think A is the best option. Not cheating on my wife, not being separated from my kids, and I weigh all these different things. Not losing my marriage, not doing any of these. I think A is the best option. Not cheating on my wife is the best option, right? And therefore, you're saying that there's no coercive cause within that scenario of A.
If there's no coercive cause and you've judged that to be the what you have all things considered reason to do, then that's what you're going to do. What's going to prevent you from doing that is a coercive cause.
Okay, so that would be B, right? So now B, let's say I choose to do it. I choose to cheat on my wife and go against my more, like, deter from my better judgment or deter from what I know is the right thing to do. And I cheat on my wife, and my kids hate me, my wife hates me, my life is ruined. I can never do ministry again because I've had a moral failure, all of these things. I still chose to do B. You're saying within choosing B, that would be, all things considered, where the coercion is taking place, right?
I'm saying that if you understand that you have more reason to do A than B, and you nonetheless do B, that means that you were coerced.
Okay, so what would be the coercion in that scenario, right? So what we've just described, I think we came to a pretty good agreement.
It could be an urge.
So A, I don't.
Yeah, it could be some kind of compulsion.
Okay, so any sort of compulsion to do what is just not the rational good.
That's right. Some irrational causal force that interferes with the exercise of your agency, right? Which is the undertaking of actions in accord with what you have most reason to do. That's what agency is.
Yeah, and so that right there is where you lose me, though, right? So if my desire to do what I know is wrong, right? I desire to make an irrational choice, and I say, I've weighed the good, I've weighed the bad. I'm still going to sleep with this other girl, right? And I'm going to cheat on my wife. What is the coercion that has impeded on my free choice? Just in this scenario, like, what would be the
I'm
coercion?
saying if you understand that you ought not do it, and nonetheless that you do it, then some disposition of your body,
like you said, compulsion,
of your mind,
right?
Yeah, a compulsion, some force is interfering with you exercising your agency. Look, there's something I'm trying to get you to understand. Okay, sorry.
Yeah, I was just saying, so that force that's interfering with my agency, that's where I just disagree. I don't think there's
That's
a force
fine if you
interfering with my
disagree,
agency.
but the point is then I don't understand what you're
this
saying.
Is the use of my agency.
Look,
I don't think it's interfering with my agency.
Look,
I think it's the use of my agency.
I don't think you understand the dialectic here, right? I'm offering a model of human action, right?
I've asked as many clarifying questions as I can, Jack.
That's
in order
fine.
To understand.
That's fine. I'm not saying the failure is yours, right? But nonetheless, you aren't understanding, right? Could be my failure. So look,
I'm trying to explain this and to where we come to a point of agreement.
No.
We may just disagree.
No. I'm trying to understand what the alternative to my view is, right? See, because if you ask me,
I don't think B is a coercive cause.
If you don't think it's a coercive cause, then I don't understand why, if you think the good is an action guiding norm, right, somebody would not act in accord with it. See, on my view, right, I can give an account.
What is your view?
Yeah, so here's my view. Right? My view is this. If somebody says, right, why did you not do the best thing to do in some given circumstance? I can give you basically, let's say, three basic answers, right, for simplicity's sake. It's probably a little bit more complicated, but let's just leave the other things out unless I have to wield them in leader. I can say, A, I made a mistake in moral perception, right? B, I made a mistake in moral reasoning.
So the mistake in moral perception, just so we're on the same page.
Yeah, so a mistake in moral perception.
No. I'm going to explain it to you. You just tell me if I'm right.
Okay.
The mistake in moral perception is that you didn't rationalize what was the real good in the situation. So you're basically saying, yeah, okay. So
I'm basically saying in that case that what was the best what I had all things considered reason to do, I didn't understand, right?
Okay. Yeah. So you just
Because
made an irrational decision that you thought was good but were wrong in the moment.
yeah, you could put it that way. The point is, right, because I'm preserving the idea that the good is the action guiding norm. So I'm using what a person judges to be good as the way to understand their actions. I'm saying they did what they judged they had most reason to do. Now, people can be, I'm prepared to grant that people can be mistaken about what they have most reason to do. And so one way they could do that is through a failure of moral perception. Right?
Okay. So we agree on the moral perception. You
Yeah,
can see something is good, but it end up not being good, and so you
that's
were
right.
just wrong about it being good. Okay.
That's right.
We're good there.
Now, you can also make a mistake of moral reasoning, right?
All right. So what's your distinction between moral reasoning and moral perception?
Well, moral perception is you just look at two things and you see that one is better, but in fact you're wrong. Whereas moral reasoning is you think, well, you know, I know this is what I most value, right? But which course of action is going to conduce to realizing that value?
But
Right.
but you can have those exact same thoughts under moral perception, right?
Yeah, what I'm saying is you might perceive the goods correctly, but nonetheless reason incorrectly as to which is the better course of action to realize that good.
Well, I'm just kind of confused. I don't see a distinction between moral perception and reasoning.
One involves an inference and one doesn't.
Okay. How?
Right? So if I just look out at two things, at the chocolate cake or the vanilla cake, I might misperceive which is the better one, right? There's no inference there. I've just made a mistake in perception. My perception was unreliable.
Well, I mean, you still have to have a reasoning process that takes place, though. Again, I know this isn't a moral thing, but you still have to have a reasoning
I'm saying
process.
that I can have reasoned perfectly correctly and still be mistaken. But there are cases where I reason incorrectly, even though I've perceived correctly. Right? Those are failures of moral reasoning.
You've reasoned incorrectly, even though you've perceived correctly?
That's right.
Did I say that right? Okay, so you're saying that you perceive correctly in that the choice you make to do good is the good. That is your perception.
No, I'm saying that that what's being aimed at is the true good, but the means by which to realize it is the wrong means.
But when we were describing moral perception earlier, I gave the examples like you were just wrong in your moral reasoning, but you don't actually know you're wrong until you commit the action.
No. I wasn't talking about an error of reasoning when I was talking about a failure in moral perception.
No, that's what I'm saying. Moral perception. I talked about moral perception. I defined it as, okay, you've made the wrong choice, right? You thought something was good, you find out it's not good. You agreed with that definition of moral perception.
Yeah, but you've reasoned correctly.
Wrong.
Yeah, but you've reasoned correctly.
So you thought something was good, it was not good. You had a failure in moral perception, right? And now you're saying that moral reasoning comes into play, because the choices have been made, right? The choice between A and B has been made. You chose B, and A was actually the more moral thing, and you regret choosing B, right? So where does the moral reasoning, how does it compete with moral perception in that A and B scenario?
Are you talking about a case where there's a failure in moral perception? Or are you talking about a case where your moral perception is correct?
Well, I'm just trying to understand. Yeah, I'm talking about where your moral, because you said just a minute ago, you said your moral perception could be correct and your moral reasoning be incorrect, and I'm just trying to understand how that applies.
Yeah, so there's all kinds of different things that you could value, right? And you could be mistaken about what to value. But let's say you look out into the world and you perceive correctly what you ought to value. And then you ask yourself, how should I realize that value? What course of action should I undertake to realize that value, right? Well, I might reason incorrectly to what would bring about realization of that value. So I've perceived correctly what the true good is, but I've misjudged, I've erred in my reasoning as to what is the best means to do it.
Okay, so perception would be not making the choice, just perceiving the options, like weighing the options.
Well, we perceive what we look out into the world, and we might perceive something as valuable, and therefore
Okay, so it's
value
not making
it.
the choice then. So how do you?
No, the
so if you're not,
the
so if
choice,
you're,
the
is
choice
moral
occurs.
reasoning.
The
The
choice
choice is the
occurs.
moral reasoning, right?
No, the moral reasoning is the deliberation in which you determine which of the two courses of action available to you, in a case where there are two, is the better one, is the one that will conduce to the realization of that value.
Okay, so, but how are they not just succinct, right? How are they not the how do you have moral reasoning without moral perception?
Look, I'm not saying you have it without moral perception. I'm saying you can make an error in moral perception. I'm sorry, you can make an error in moral reasoning if you've perceived the goods correctly.
Okay, maybe let me try this, and this is no hate on you, Jack. Just maybe another atheist could explain it to me better.
No, look,
on what you're
I'll
trying to say.
I'll just give you an example, right? Let's say you correctly understand, right, that you should be in accord with God rather than be in accord with, I don't know, Hitler. So you've perceived who the good person is and who the bad person is. You've perceived correctly, right?
Okay, so
And so then you think,
in this example, God is real. I've chosen to serve God. I've chosen the moral good.
Yeah, but you've perceived correctly who you should be in accord with, right? And so then you think, okay, well, given that I want to be in accord with God, right, I have various courses of action available to me. So which course of action will conduce to realizing God's aims rather than Hitler's aims? Right?
But I've already chosen God. Right?
You've chosen God, but you still have to figure out what is actually going to serve God rather than serve Hitler, right?
But then how have I chosen God? So are you just saying they're indeterminate on like the matters of like how
Look, it could be
takes?
something. Look, let me give you a different example since this is confusing you. Let's say you just want to save lives.
I want to see if I'm the only one confused. I would love to see if I'm the only one not getting it, just momentarily.
Do people here understand the distinction between moral reasoning and moral perception that I'm drawing? Anybody?
Would it be moral perception to be like Will Smith hitting Chris Rock? Like he thought at the time that was the right thing to do, and then afterwards he realized it was the wrong thing to do.
That could be a failure of moral perception, right? But let's say your aim is to save lives, right? And let's say saving lives is the best thing to do, right? Nonetheless, you could make a mistake about what course of action will save the most lives.
Like you could jump in.
You could reason incorrectly.
Yeah, like
you could reason incorrectly.
But what I'm saying is that's still your moral perception.
No,
I
it's not moral perception. It's reasoning. You're reasoning. You're trying to evaluate different courses of action. You're making various judgments about probability, right? The way the world works, right? You could have all the correct facts about the way the world works, right? And nonetheless, draw a faulty inference about what's most likely to happen, right? You could make an error in calculation.
Right? That would be moral reasoning.
I'm sorry?
That would be a failure in moral reasoning.
That would be a failure in moral reasoning.
Right. Okay.
But you've perceived correctly what the right thing to what the right value is to have. That is that you ought to save lives rather than, I don't know, kill people, right? Saving lives is more valuable than killing people, right? Let's say that's
Okay.
the correct thing to do. That's the correct value to have. I mean, well, you've perceived correctly what the correct value to, you've perceived correctly what the true value to have is, right?
Okay, so do this. Explain it in the confines of the example we did about like the cheating, right? Cheating on your wife. So explain moral perception, moral reasoning.
Yeah.
That
So
would be
again,
that would be neither, right? That would
with
be
the
neither.
cheating, there are three things that can happen on my model. On the one hand, you can misperceive that cheating on your wife is a better thing to do.
Yeah, so that would be incorrect moral perception.
Incorrect moral perception.
Yeah.
Now, it could be that you just have some sort of other value. Let's say your value is to make people happy. And so you might think, well, how am
So
I
like
going to...
the other woman. Let's say people in this case would be, I want to make the other woman happy.
I want to
right?
increase the aggregate of happiness in the world, right? I want to maximize the amount of happiness that there is.
Well, I think that's kind of leaving like the confines of the analogy. Right. So just within the analogy of the cheating.
No, because I can say, if I had that as my value, and let's say that was the correct value, right? I could be mistaken in thinking that cheating on my wife would maximize happiness rather than being faithful to my wife, right?
So let's just say it would maximize the happiness of the woman that you're cheating on your wife with.
Well, I mean, you'd want to
right,
talk about everybody's happiness, right? So, you might make your children unhappy, but you might make your mistress up the various things. And so either you've...
Jack, you're cutting out. You're cutting out, Jack.
Sorry.
So the failure in moral
Is it
perception.
okay now?
So the failure in moral perception and the failure in moral reason, both of those, you think you're doing the right thing.
That's right. Those are cases
Okay,
where
right,
you've acted in accord with what you judge to be the good.
Right.
You're just mistaken about which of the two choices is the better choice.
But the coercion.
The coercion is a case.
I'm totally on board with
right.
you.
You know you're doing the wrong thing. You just can't stop yourself.
That's right.
So
that's it.
Right,
That's
okay.
it. So see, now on my model, I have an explanation for why people do things.
Okay.
Wait, let Haiti say that again.
Go ahead.
The first two, you think you're doing the right thing in the moment. The coercion, you know you're doing the wrong thing, but you cannot stop yourself because you've got this urge or this, what is it?
A compulsion, a disposition.
It could be addiction,
an addiction.
Could be desire, whatever.
Yeah.
Right.
Or an external force, right? Sometimes external forces interfere with the realization of an aim, right? Like I can fire an arrow at a target and the wind, and I could have, aimed correctly if there was no wind, right? And then there can just suddenly be a gust of wind that I didn't anticipate, and it blows the arrow out of my path, right? So I failed to realize my aim.
So I can understand like where they're together, right? A failure of moral perception or a failure of moral reasoning under your model. That's where they happen at the same time. You would have a failure of moral perception and a failure of moral reasoning.
Well, you don't have to have both. You could have one and not the other.
The point is, you still think you're acting in accordance with.
That's right.
Right. Okay, but the third one, you know you're not.
Yeah, you understand that you're not doing what you ought to be doing. Right. And so on my model, I have an explanation for why people don't do the good or do the good. They do the good when they correctly judge what is good. Right. And they correctly reason as to how to achieve that good. And there's no forces that interfere with the exercise of their free agency. Right. Either internal or external forces, right? When people fail to do the good, they either misperceive what the goods are, or they reason incorrectly as to how to bring about those goods, or they are coerced. That's it. Now, if you say that, if you reject that model of human action, then I just don't understand, right, when somebody fails to do the good. It just sounds like you're rejecting the idea that the good is action guiding norm. I just don't understand how you understand agency works at all.
Well, do you reject it, Triple B? Do you reject that model, or do you think that model makes sense?
I think I have to think about it a little.
Okay, well, we don't have to
More, because
pursue this now. You know,